Imagine a high school that operates way less like a normal place of learning, and honestly, a lot more like a high-security prison for daily wage laborers. It sounds absolutely wild, right? Well, today in this explainer, we are decoding the daily madness of this highly specific, highly toxic ecosystem using verified survivor accounts. And trust me, it gets intense.
According to the terrifying accounts we've gathered, this place wasn't really a school at all. It was practically a correctional facility. Parents would essentially drop their kids off to clock in for what felt like daily wage labor. It was this brutal, intense survival training that was just cleverly disguised as a standard education. To really wrap our heads around how this bizarre ecosystem functioned, we're going to break it down into 5 crucial elements. We'll look at the chaotic transport system, the administration running the show, the underground black market economy, the terrifying guards, and finally, the absolute wasteland that was the washroom.
All right, let's dive right into our first section, the inmate transport system, because simply getting to this facility was basically half the battle.
The daily nightmare actually kicked off at an ungodly 5 a.m. Picture this. You're dragged out of bed and shoved into a van ironically named Magic, driven by a guy known only as Bayaji. And this wasn't a quick trip. This was an exhaustive cross-city off-roading expedition that practically guaranteed a flat tire around 8 a.m. The end result? You arrive late to the facility. Every single day.
Now, surviving this commute wasn't just a physical test. It required some master-level psychological warfare. Take this one brilliant, low-stakes social engineering tactic we found. An inmate would leverage the 5 a.m. pickup by boarding the empty van first, dropping a bag on the next seat and completely faking sleep. Then, when his crush, let's call her Chameli, boarded the packed van last, he'd act utterly indifferent. He'd show zero desperation, giving her literally no choice but to take the only open seat right next to him.
But what if you wanted to connect with other commuters? Well, direct, in-person interaction was way too risky in this environment, so inmates evolved. They resorted to using location-based dating apps like Happen to digitally track down people they crossed paths with during that grueling morning route. It was like this hyper-local, high-stakes networking where you avoided eye contact in real life but connected in the digital underground. And I have to mention, the transportation rivalries were fierce. It was literal vehicular combat. You had these overstuffed auto rickshaws that would actively try to drag race the Magic van in the middle of traffic. The G-force during these high-speed chases was so intense that unanchored students would actually fall out the back, leaving Bayaji to collect the fallen casualties off the pavement. Just total chaos.
Which brings us to Section 2. The facility administration. Because if you thought the commute was unhinged, wait until you meet the wardens running this place.
Let's look at the folks at the top of the food chain. First up, you have Don, the terrifying in-charge who supposedly drives his car while standing up. Don acts as a sort of roof sniper, watching everyone, and, bizarrely, is rumored to be physically shrinking in height over time. Then there's Jemu Didi. She rides a Royal Enfield Bullet, is rumored to secretly own a Mercedes, yet spends her days casually sweeping the floors just to maintain this weirdly humble image. You literally can't make this stuff up.
Okay, moving on to Section 3, we absolutely have to talk about the black market pen economy. Yes, you heard me right, pens.
See, inside these walls, traditional fiat money meant absolutely nothing. The entire economy was driven exclusively by stationery. Inmates would literally wager their entire net worth in these illicit, high-stakes pen fight syndicates. It perfectly mimicked a real-world debt trap. You'd lose your stash, borrow inventory on margin, lose that too, and get sucked into a completely insurmountable cycle of pen-based debt.
And obviously, this created a brutal socioeconomic divide among the inmates. At the bottom, you had the peasant class, trading in the 5-rupee Jiffy Gel. This thing was a weapon of mass destruction that would violently bleed ink through 10 pages of a notebook. But at the very top, the Trimax. Owning a Trimax made you absolute royalty. It was a billionaire status symbol. Owners would obsessively unscrew the barrel after writing every single letter, just to compulsively monitor their ink wealth. So who exactly was policing this highly volatile black market? Let's dive into Section 4 and meet the terrifying prison guards. Enforcing the laws of the yard was a man known to the inmates exclusively by his code name, Bushin. Bushin had the aesthetic of a sketchy sports teacher, but the sheer aggression of a hostile customs agent. The crazy thing? He would only deploy his superhuman sprinting speed if a Trimax pen was reported stolen. He'd aggressively rip apart bags even if the kids simply left the pen at home.
Oh, and inexplicably, he had his own name tattooed across his thighs. Boo on one leg, Sean on the other.
But if you want to understand the absolute, unchecked ruthlessness of the guards here, you just have to look at the English teacher, nicknamed Chota Bheem. We found this horrific account where a grieving student failed to do his homework because his father had just passed away. Bheem didn't offer condolences. Instead, he physically struck the kid and literally told him to die too. It's just staggering.
And Bheem's physical combat tactics? Completely unhinged. Because he was quite short, assaulting a taller student meant he had to violently leap into the air just to reach their waist. Couple that with his suffocatingly strong perfume and the deeply ironic fact that this English teacher's entire pedagogical method consisted of translating English sentences directly back into English. Finally, let's explore the one place inmates could try to escape the watchful eyes of the guards. Section 5. The Washroom Wasteland.
If the classrooms felt like a prison, the washrooms were a total apocalyptic collapse of human civilization. To bypass the strict one-at-a-time hall pass rule, groups of inmates would aggressively chug excess water so they genuinely all had to go at once. Once inside that lawless sanctuary, they'd dismantle the plumbing, steal the light bulbs, and stand around in pitch darkness. They'd literally just stare blankly at the walls for inner peace while casually urinating on each other's shoes.
But guys, here is the absolute most shocking survival tactic we uncovered. The Finney balls. Inmates would find these toxic white chemical blocks used to sanitize the urinals, somehow mistake them for mouth fresheners, and willingly chew them. They literally advised each other to suck on these urinal cakes slowly because it provided a, quote, refreshing cooling effect. I mean, let that sink in for a second.
And yet, amidst all this literal toxicity, gangs of up to 10 inmates would boldly strut down the hallways with their chests puffed out, completely ignoring the administration. Their delusion was fascinating. They truly believed that simply paying their tuition granted them absolute immunity from the principal. They felt like they basically owned the real estate, even though ironically half the gang hadn't even paid their fees yet. So, as we wrap up this explainer, we have to ask ourselves a pretty disturbing final question. When an education system devolves into a black market economy with unhinged guards, high-speed van chases, and toxic urinal cake survival tactics, it entirely redefines the concept of learning. It's no longer about academics, right? It becomes a masterclass in sheer human adaptability. It makes you wonder, what toxic environments are we surviving in our own lives right now, simply because we've normalized the madness? Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. Stay curious, and I'll catch you in the next one.